By associating Christian with Boy, George hoped to establish the nucleus of a new pride of lions. Boy and George had been friends, comrades one might say, for almost 7 years. They had first met during the making of a film called Born Free, and in the years that followed, while Boy was living a natural life in the wilds, free to go anywhere he pleased, he never forgot to call in at George's camp to see his old friend. Boy became the dominant male of George's pride, the first artificial or man-made pride, composed of lions no longer acquired once the filming of Born Free was over. In the large national park where they all lived, Boy successfully defended their territory against the wild lions of the area, stealing their females, killing buffaloes and other large animals. This was the formidable African lion that Christian would have to face. While waiting for George's return, Christian, Ace and John explored the territory around the camp, resting occasionally by the cool waters of the Tana River. Although lions are good swimmers, Christian had never been keen to get his feet wet. We remembered the last time in England we'd taken him out for exercise. An early morning at the seaside. England was thousands of miles away, and Christian, if all went well in the next week or two, would never return. Tomorrow morning, George would be back with the big lion, Boy, and the association of lion with lion must start. Gradually, carefully, with every precaution. Sadly, this touching relationship could not continue. George arrived back. The 600-mile journey had gone according to schedule, but he had had to skirt Nairobi and the densely populated areas by night. Boy would not tolerate crowds of people surging round his cage. They had traveled non-stop. The journey had been a nightmare. Christian's old crate with its precious content had to be unloaded first and quickly placed in the cool shade. But that was all there was time to do. George felt he must see to Boy. The rehabilitation of the Born Free lions had been successful for everyone except Boy. Although the leader and most powerful of them all, he had been gored when bringing down a buffalo and severely injured. For the last 8 months, he'd been convalescing at George's camp at Naivasha. Of course, he'd had minor injuries before. It's natural for a predator to take a certain amount of punishment. To survive, a pride needs to kill at least once or twice a week. When George found Boy, he was emaciated. He could hardly walk. George gave him a goat. But it wasn't just starvation, cuts, and superficial injuries. His foreleg was badly broken in 2 places. Sue and Tony Harthorne, the famous veterinary surgeons, agreed only a major operation could save his life. Boy took the jab without protest. His trust in George was incredible. Beside a double fractured foreleg, he had other injuries. As the anesthetic took effect and his vision became blurred, George sat with his old comrade to comfort him and to lure him gently into oblivion. The operation was performed under the most primitive conditions. Tony and Sue Harthorn worked by feel. 2 steel pins, one 13 inches long, had to be introduced down the center of the fractured bones to keep them and all the splinters in place. People less brilliant would never have attempted it. It took altogether 3.5 hours. The operation itself was successful, but the recovery was slow, and the leg must have been very painful. Never once did he show to his human friends any anger or resentment. This from a lion which was almost wild, which had been living a natural life for so long, was extraordinary. Ace and John had gone with Christian to spend the morning on some distant rocks, downwind and well away from the main camp. It was important that Boy did not scent a strange lion in the area. But now we must look to the contents of Christian's old crate. A small baby lion, a female about 3 months old, called by George Catania. A few weeks before we'd arrived, George heard she'd been found by a game scout, abandoned. George had made a small detour, as he put it, of 200 miles, and then had taken her back to Naivasha, where she'd been staying with Boy, for company. There was no doubt what Boy thought. He was quite besotted by her. She was devoted to him. A female was a fortunate find indeed. She would eventually be invaluable. But George knew enough about lions to realize that Boy would be jealous, would guard her. And in trying to associate Boy and Christian, this undoubtedly could add to our problems. Before we could release Boy to wander about the camp as he pleased, we had to see if he would accept Christian. Lions seldom accept strangers at first sight. Sometimes they never accept them. Christian needed to get used to seeing Boy. His strength and size was a bit overpowering, as Ace and John remarked more than once. None of them had ever met a fully grown lion before. Christian's reaction was strange. He behaved exactly as if Boy wasn't there. Boy, on the other hand, with every step, watched Christian's every movement. We all felt very sorry for Christian. His heart was pounding, but there was no other way. Christian adopted a submissive position. He found Boy's roars unnerving and lashed out at anything that seemed to be too close. In this case, it was Ace's foot. But George was carefully noting, Christian, even with his background of European zoos, still had a lot of natural wild instincts left. Boy went off to scent and mark the territory as his. The next week or two would be critical. The slender dividing wire obviously wouldn't stand up to Boy's continued charges, so we moved him outside the more substantial perimeter fencing. Catania objected very strongly to this. To be separated from her beloved boy, she found intolerable. If anything, the situation seemed to be worsening. Nevertheless, as we had no alternative, we decided to press on to the next stage. If Christian and Catania could get on well together, perhaps Boy might be less protective. On the other hand, it could make him more possessive, if that were possible. It wasn't the wonderful meeting we'd hoped for. Christian, with his British background, did not seem to know the right approaches, was awkward and shy. Catania was unimpressed. Time and time again, she returned to Boy. Then quite suddenly there was a change of attitude. Maybe Christian lying down seemed less formidable. In spite of her size, she was quite capable of putting him in his place. After all, she was a female. George wondered if Boy would accept the situation. On the face of it, the more he saw them playing together, the more he appeared to calm down. It seemed that Christian had at last entered the lion world, found a friend, a little orphan in Africa. We did nothing to disturb this beautiful and valuable friendship. We wanted it to be well established. We needn't have worried. Soon they were sharing a house, practically living together. After a few days, when we felt confident that this relationship was secure, we made it possible for Catania to return to Boy. After all, we didn't want to damage that relationship. And she could carry scents and smells. It was a fairly cool reception. Boy plainly disapproved of the goings-on of the past few days. But he quite obviously disapproved of Christian's scent even more. George tried to act as a go-between, but there was no progress. We could now see no other ways left that would effectively minimize the risk of a confrontation. Their future could only be resolved by letting them meet in the open, by bringing them face to face. The meeting with Boy, which would decide Christian's fate, was planned to take place on the bald top of a rocky outcrop, not far from camp. It was the only open area for miles around. It would allow the lions to see each other at a distance, avoid ambushes, allow Christian to run, escape, if he felt he had to. We hoped this would not be the case. Boy would be unlikely to allow Christian back once he had driven him out of the area.